Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army.
Yes, we are so glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm really glad you could join us today because, if you're listening to this, you're probably someone who love to look past the surface of things.
Right. You want to actually understand the mechanisms of real human transformation, not just the surface level history.
Exactly. And today we are going on a deep dive that takes us into some of the most profound and honestly raw territory we've ever explored.
Totally.
We are heading straight into the absolute darkest slums of 19th century New York City.
And, we're going to look at psychological and spiritual mechanics that frankly feel incredibly modern.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, even though we're traveling back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, the insights into addiction and recovery that we're unpacking today, they map so perfectly onto the most cutting edge behavioral science we have right now.
Yeah, it's wild how ahead of its time it is. But, okay, I want to start by painting a really vivid picture for you.
Okay, let's do it.
I want you to imagine a man who has reached the absolute bottom. And I don't mean like a metaphorical bottom.
Right, not just a bad day.
No, I mean he is physically dying of delirium tremens in this filthy room. He's a penniless thief.
Wow.
He's a confirmed drunkard who has completely squandered a really thriving business. He's alienated his whole family, and he's just lost every single shred of his own self-respect.
So in the vocabulary of the Gilded Age, he is essentially a quote-unquote bum.
Exactly. But hold on, I want to interrupt that image for a second.
Okay.
Take that exact same man, right? Fast forward a few decades. He's just passed away, and he's being eulogized by the absolute highest, most influential members of American society.
That is quite the pivot.
It is. And the words echoing through these massive, wealthy cathedrals to describe this former penniless thief are, let me get the quote, "The greatest American of his time, not measured in money or in fame, but in love and in likeness to Christ."
It's just a staggering contrast. I mean, almost unbelievable.
Right. When you hear that, it sounds like this perfect, neat little Sunday school morality tale.
Like somebody just made it up.
Yeah, exactly. But it isn't fiction. This is entirely documented history. So our source material today is this 1906 biography titled S.H. Hadley of Water Street, A Miracle of Grace.
Written by J. Wilbur Chapman, right?
Yep, J. Wilbur Chapman. And our mission on this deep dive today is to explore the real life of Samuel Hopkins Hadley.
And, his completely radical approach to rescue mission work, plus just the astonishing raw stories of the outcasts he actually served.
Yeah, we really need to set the historical stage here immediately because context is basically everything for this.
It really is, because when people today think about 19th century charity or Victorian mission work, they usually picture something very sanitized.
Oh, totally. Like very polite benevolence.
Right. You imagine wealthy people in these tailored coats handing out fresh loaves of bread to grateful, quiet paupers.
The ones who just say, "Thank you, sir," and then quietly go back to being poor in the corner.
Exactly. The whole Charles Dickens Tiny Tim version of poverty. But Chapman's biography, it just shatters that illusion immediately.
Oh, it really does.
This is not a story of pristine charity. It's a gritty, dangerous, and often terrifying look at the lowest rungs of a rapidly industrializing society.
Yeah, the people finding their way to Water Street were the people that even the jails and the hospitals had violently kicked out.
They were the rejects of the rejects.
Right. So this is a story about the absolute muddy trenches of human suffering and really the deeply illogical power of unconditional love to reach into those spaces.
So let's actually trace how Samuel Hadley ended up in those trenches to begin with.
Yes, let's go back to the start.
Because the paradox of his life starts the moment he was born. It was in 1842 in a log house built by his father in Malta Township over in Ohio.
Now wait, when you hear log cabin in Ohio in 1842, you immediately think humble pioneer beginnings.
Right, like Abraham Lincoln or something.
Yeah, exactly. You think of people chopping wood, roughing it on the frontier, totally separated from high society. But that is actually entirely misleading in Hadley's case, isn't it?
It is completely misleading. I mean, the environment might have been frontier Ohio, but his lineage was incredibly prestigious.
Like, surprisingly so.
Yeah. He came from a highly religious, highly educated New England family tree. Chapman actually points out that Hadley was a direct descendant of the great Calvinistic preacher of Enfield.
Wow.
And his own grandfather was a clergyman. Plus, Samuel was named after his mother's brother, who was one of the early graduates of Yale College.
So just imagine the psychological weight of that.
It's massive.
You're in a log cabin, sure, but the atmosphere inside that cabin is heavy with Ivy League expectations and rigorous theology.
And this lineage of moral giants looking down at you.
Right. Which actually brings us to his brother, Colonel H.H. Hadley. Or Henry.
Oh, man, Henry.
Yeah, there's this incredibly human, somewhat dark anecdote early in the biography about Henry's birth.
I love this story. It's so telling.
It really is. So the mother is looking down at newborn Henry in his crib, and she is just weeping uncontrollably.
Like full-on sobbing.
Yeah. And the father walks into the room, understandably alarmed, and asks what the trouble is. And the mother just sobs, "Oh, he's so homely."
It's a brilliant little inclusion by the biographer to put that in there.
It really humanizes this otherwise rigid, high-expectation family.
And the father's response is equally telling because he immediately pushes back.
Yeah.
He's offended by the tears and he says, "Homely, mercy, no. Why, he'll be a president someday."
The bar was literally set at the presidency from day one.
Talk about pressure.
And honestly, Henry almost lived up to that immense potential. I mean, he went on to command a regiment in the Civil War.
He was clearly a man of immense intellect and charisma.
He was. But here is the tragic turn. Because both of these brothers, despite the Yale uncles, despite the Calvinist lineage, they both fell into the most severe, life-destroying alcoholism imaginable.
Yeah, the statistics the biography provides for Henry are almost medically incomprehensible.
They really are.
It documents that at one point, Henry gorged himself on 52 drinks in a single day.
Wait, let's just pause on that. 52 drinks.
It's absurd.
From a purely physiological standpoint, how is a human heart still beating after that? How is his liver functioning?
It probably barely was.
I mean, just the logistical effort of acquiring and consuming 52 drinks in a 24-hour period, it implies a compulsion that just overrides every other basic human drive, like eating or sleeping.
It illustrates a profound physical dependency. His internal compass was completely shattered.
And Samuel's descent was equally devastating, right? Chapman doesn't sugarcoat the fall at all.
Not at all. Samuel became a confirmed drunkard, a gambler, a thief.
He lost his money, lost a successful business.
He became what the society of his day deemed a complete and utter failure, just entirely disconnected from the social contract.
You know, I want to pause and consider the framing of this biography for a second, because it raises an interesting question about how addiction was viewed back then.
How so?
Well, Chapman goes out of his way to highlight this highly educated religious lineage right next to Samuel's identity as a destitute thief. Do you think the author is implying that his fall was a unique tragedy because of his background? Or is he making a broader point about how addiction just absolutely does not care about your pedigree?
That's the crucial tension of those early chapters, really. If we look at the theological and psychological framework of 1906, Samuel's ultimate conversion is repeatedly framed as a miracle of grace.
Right, which is in the title.
Exactly. So in that context, the prestige of his background serves as a measuring stick for the sheer velocity and depth of his drop.
I see.
The author is proving that addiction is the ultimate equalizer. It doesn't matter if your uncle went to Yale. It doesn't matter if your grandfather was a respected clergyman.
Yeah, alcohol just doesn't care.
Right. When the chemical dependency takes over the brain, the descent is exactly the same as it is for a man born in the gutter.
That makes a lot of sense.
But from a narrative and spiritual perspective, this massive fall proves that grace can reach across any distance. The fact that he fell from such heights makes the rescue seem that much more impossible.
And the turning point for Samuel is just visceral. He is at the absolute end of his rope, and he decides to go to the Jerry McAuley Cremorne mission.
Which was over on West 32nd Street.
Yeah. He recalls that it was a Sunday night and the house was just packed, and he's physically suffering. He believes he is in the onset of delirium tremens.
Which, for context for you listening, involves severe hallucinations, uncontrollable shaking, a spiking heart rate.
It's a genuine medical emergency.
Totally.
So he has to push his way through this crowded, sweaty aisle just to get near the platform. And in that chaotic room, he has a profound break from reality as he knows it.
It's a complete psychological and spiritual paradigm shift for him. He describes feeling what he called a great and mighty presence.
Wow.
In that moment of physical agony, he fully believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that Jesus Christ had come into that specific room specifically to save him from dying of DTs.
But it wasn't just like a feeling of comfort, right? He actually heard a voice.
Yes, a very distinct, unavoidable call. The words he recorded hearing were, "My child, work for me. Go and tell them there are thousands who would come to me if they only knew me.
Go and tell them. That is what fascinates me so much. It wasn't a passive salvation.
Not at all.
It wasn't, you are forgiven, now go live a quiet, polite life in the suburbs. It was an immediate, staggering commission to turn right back around and face the darkness he was just saved from.
And the immediate aftermath of this moment is incredible. He experiences an absolute instantaneous deliverance from the fascination of gambling and cards.
He actually wrote that he hated them ever after that day.
This specific phenomenon is fascinating when we consider the mechanics of sudden conversion experiences. The philosopher William James was writing The Varieties of Religious Experience right around the same time.
Oh, really? That's interesting timing.
Yeah. And James studied these exact types of radical transformations. He proposed that a sudden, massive shift in a person's emotional center can actually rewire their immediate desires and compulsions.
So the habit loops in the brain just get entirely overwritten.
Exactly, by a new, all-consuming emotional truth. For Hadley, the psychological hold of gambling and the intense physical dependency on alcohol were seemingly shattered in that single intense moment.
That is just incredible. But, having a transcendent experience in a packed room on a Sunday night is one thing.
Sure.
Taking that deeply personal internal experience and translating it into a lifelong, grueling, day in and day out mission in the most dangerous part of the city that requires a completely different kind of stamina.
It takes immense endurance.
Right. Because the initial rescue happens at the Cremorne mission, but Hadley's actual life's work takes place at a totally different location, 316 Water Street.
Yes, and we really cannot understand Hadley's work without understanding the geography and the dark history of 316 Water Street.
It's practically a character in the story itself.
It really is.
Oh, the history of this place is like a grim crossover between a Charles Dickens novel and a Martin Scorsese film.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
So it was originally founded by Jerry McAuley, and McAuley's backstory is wild on its own.
Very wild.
He was an ex-convict who spent 19 years in Sing Sing prison. And we are talking about 19th century Sing Sing. Brutal, dark, disease-ridden.
And while he was in prison, he was actually converted by his former prize-fighting partner.
A man literally known on the streets as Awful Gardner, which is just an amazing name.
You can't make that up. But we shouldn't gloss over the reality of Jerry McAuley's recovery because it deeply informs the entire culture of the mission later on.
Good point. What happened with him?
Well, McAuley didn't just get saved in prison and walk a straight line forever. His biography explicitly notes that he backslid into the gutter 5 separate times before he finally succeeded in staying sober.
5 times?
Yeah, so that intimate knowledge of failure is basically baked right into the DNA of the Water Street mission.
And the physical location of the mission, it's almost hard to conceptualize how bad it was. 316 Water Street had previously been a dance house.
Which in those days was essentially a front for extreme vice, prostitution, and robbery.
Yeah, and it was situated in an area that Chapman bluntly calls the most villainous slum region in America.
That's a quote.
We were talking about a neighborhood where it was explicitly understood that a man's life was not safe after dark. There were no streetlights, no police presence that mattered. It was just the forgotten underbelly of the city.
And when S.H. Hadley eventually takes over this old Water Street mission, he brings a very specific, fiercely defended philosophy to the operation.
It completely bucked the philanthropic trends of the era, didn't it?
It totally did. He famously declared that they didn't want nice sinners or well-dressed sinners.
He wanted the worst.
Exactly. He said, "We are here to save the worst, the vilest, and the most degraded on earth, and we love to see that kind come in preference to all others."
He actually had a quote that I just cannot get out of my head. He said, "We mission bums are a part of God's aristocracy."
That is just such a powerful statement.
Think about the radical reframing happening there. Taking the absolute worst insult society can hurl at you, a vum, a piece of trash, a throwaway, and attaching it to the highest possible divine status. It's an ideological rebellion.
It is a brilliant psychological inversion, really. It takes the weapon of societal shame and turns it into a badge of exclusive honor.
Yeah, that's exactly what it does.
And crucially, this wasn't just lofty rhetoric. The practical day-to-day operations of the mission matched this philosophy perfectly. They didn't just stand behind a wooden pulpit and preach hellfire at people who were freezing to death.
Because they knew that didn't work.
Right. Hadley recognized that a man cannot hear a spiritual message if the noise of his own starvation or his own physical withdrawal is too loud.
That makes total sense.
So they provided clothing, they provided hot food, they dispensed medicine, offered clean lodging, and actually arranged for hospital care.
When I was reading about their operational strategy, the analogy that kept coming to my mind was medical triage, but inverted.
Oh, how so?
Well, usually a standard hospital takes everyone who walks through the doors,
Yeah.
but they prioritize the worst cases. So the gunshot wounds over the sprained ankles.
Your standard triage.
Right. But the Water Street mission was like a trauma center that actively turned away people with a common cold or even a broken arm.
They wanted only the critical cases.
Yeah, they effectively told the mildly struggling people to go to a standard church or charity because they needed every single bed, every single bandage, and every ounce of their emotional energy for the patients who were actively flatlining on the cobblestone streets.
That is a highly accurate way to look at their resource allocation. And the way they treated these flatlining patients was guided by a strict, almost shocking code of conduct. Hadley actually wrote it out plainly. He said, "We do not preach or meddle. We do not denounce, arraign, or persecute. We do not insist that others shall think as we do or be as we are."
See, that is the part that completely disrupts my understanding of 19th century charity. We do not meddle, we do not denounce.
It's very countercultural for the time.
It really is. We are talking about interacting with people who are actively stealing, who are drinking themselves to death, who've abandoned their children. The natural instinct of 99% of society, even the most charitable, well-meaning parts of society, is to say, I will give you this bowl of soup, but first I need to tell you how wrong your lifestyle is.
Right. I need to denounce your actions to ensure you know you need to change.
Exactly. Why on earth did Hadley refuse to do that?
If we unpack the psychological brilliance of this no denouncing rule, it really all comes down to the mechanics of shame.
Okay, walk me through that.
So traditional institutions, even those run by very well-meaning people, they erect a massive barrier of shame. When a person is deeply entrenched in severe addiction and moral failure, their internal monologue is already incredibly punitive.
They already know they're failing.
Exactly. They hate themselves. So when an external authority figure denounces them, it simply validates and reinforces that self-hatred.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
And what does a person in pain do with self-hatred? They seek to numb it. They are driven right back to the very substance or behavior that caused the shame in the first place.
It becomes a vicious cycle.
Precisely. By strictly refusing to meddle or denounce, Hadley completely short-circuited that shame cycle.
You just cut it off at the knees.
He created an environment where the outcast didn't have to spend energy holding up defensive walls. He offered radical baseline acceptance first, trusting that internal transformation would follow.
Rather than demanding behavioral transformation as the price of admission.
Right.
Which is incredibly beautiful in theory. But implementing that in reality with deeply broken people sounds agonizing.
It was not easy.
Because removing shame and offering radical acceptance doesn't mean everyone magically gets better on the first try. And this is where the biography gets surprisingly dark, but also incredibly realistic. Chapman is brutally honest about the reality of relapse.
Yes, it is perhaps the most sobering aspect of the entire narrative. The author doesn't shy away from the failure rate at all, and neither did Hadley.
They were very upfront about it.
Very. When critics or supporters would ask Hadley if his men fall back into their old ways, he would freely admit it. He said, "Yes, I am sorry to say they do fall, many of them, and often fall many times."
That's a tough pill to swallow for donors, I bet.
Oh, sure. But the operative philosophy was in the second half of his sentence. He followed it up with, "But we never give a man up."
And out of this grueling cycle of relapse, Hadley developed a profound, almost jarring concept. He would frequently say, "The devil is the best missionary we get around Water Street."
It's quite a statement.
I had to stop and reread that line several times when I saw it. What exactly does he mean by calling the devil a missionary?
He was describing the cyclical, deceptive nature of early recovery and how utter failure can actually be a tool for ultimate surrender.
Okay, how does that work?
He outlines a very specific, observable pattern. So a man comes into the mission desperate. He gets sober, he gets clean clothes, he starts feeling physically healthy for the first time in years.
Things are looking up.
Right. And the mission helps him secure a good job. But then, inevitably, human hubris sets in.
Oh, no.
The man starts to feel like he doesn't need the mission anymore. He thinks his addiction was just a temporary lapse in judgment, and now he is cured.
Right. He thinks, I've got the steering wheel back, I'm in control now.
Exactly. This is what modern recovery communities sometimes call the pink cloud phase.
Oh, I've heard of that.
So this man stops coming around Water Street. He wanders over to the Bowery. He decides he's strong enough to go into a playhouse just for entertainment.
Just dipping a toe back in.
Yeah. Then, feeling highly confident in his new willpower, he takes an easy, seemingly harmless step into a saloon, maybe just to see old friends, or thinking he can have just one beer.
And we know how that ends.
We do. As Hadley vividly described it, Satan stamps on him with both feet.
Wow.
The chemical hooks engage instantly. Within 24 hours, the man has blown his entire paycheck, he has sold his decent clothes for liquor, and he has lost the job the mission got for him.
He is completely, totally decimated in a single day.
Yes. It's tragic, but here is the psychological mechanism of why the devil is the best missionary. It is only after that complete and utter decimation that the man returns to Water Street truly crushed.
Because his pride is completely evaporated.
His illusions of self-control and willpower are utterly shattered.
Huh.
And at that exact moment of absolute ego death, he is finally truly ready to accept help on a foundational spiritual level.
So the relapse, as excruciating as it is to watch, acts as the final breaking of the ego necessary for true, lasting surrender.
Exactly.
And the incredible part is that the mission is right there to catch them when that ego breaks without saying, "I told you so."
They never say that.
There is a specific story in the biography that perfectly illustrates this radical patience, and it involves Hadley's own winter overcoat.
Oh, this story is amazing.
It really is. So a man, an ex-convict and a known drunkard, comes to the mission. They take him in, they clean him up, and they actually give him a job working at the mission.
They extend real trust to him.
Right. And how does he repay that trust? He promptly steals the superintendent's overcoat. He steals directly from the man who was actively saving his life.
And he doesn't just steal it to stay warm either.
No.
He immediately pawns it, goes on a massive drinking spree with the cash, and ends up getting arrested.
Right. So he goes to jail, and when he eventually gets out, he is totally destitute again. Every other door in the city is closed to him. So he slinks back to Water Street.
Which took some nerve. Seriously. Now, put yourself in Hadley's position. This guy abused your trust and stole your coat. Human nature screams at you to say, "You blew your chance. Get out of here, you thief."
Most people would do exactly that.
But instead, Hadley welcomes him back with open arms. And Chapman notes that this specific instance of radical, illogical forgiveness resulted in the man's permanent restoration. He never drank or stole again.
It is the ultimate stress test of the no-denouncing philosophy, and it worked.
But I want to explore the emotional toll of this for a minute, because it is very easy for us to sit here over a century later and romanticize this.
Oh, definitely.
We never give up a man. It sounds great when we're talking about it today,
Right.
but practically speaking, watching people you have poured your soul into destroy themselves over and over again, having people look you in the eye, swear they are clean, and then steal your coat to buy whiskey.
It's crushing. That has to lead to extreme compassion fatigue. Modern social workers, doctors, and therapists burn out constantly dealing with a fraction of this trauma. How did Hadley not become entirely cynical? How did he prevent his heart from turning to stone?
It is a vital question about sustainability in trauma work, and Chapman provides a very clear, very visceral answer straight from Hadley's own journals.
What did he say?
Well, when people would ask him if the work was discouraging, Hadley wouldn't talk positivity his way out of it. He would admit, oh yes, it is simply heartbreaking from a human point of view.
So he acknowledged the pain.
Fully. But he never grew hard or indifferent because he utilized a very specific active memory. He said that he and all the core workers there vividly remembered their own smell of fire on their garments.
The smell of fire on his garments. What a heavy, brilliant metaphor.
It is. He refused to allow himself the luxury of forgetting where he came from. He wrote, "We too have stooped down and drank out of the bitter stream." Wow. This is the core difference between sympathy and empathy.
Can you break that down?
Sure. Sympathy is looking down at a suffering person from a place of safety and feeling bad for them. Sympathy exhausts you because it is a one-way expenditure of energy.
Right.
Empathy is looking at a suffering person and recognizing your shared humanity. Every single time a man lied to him or showed up drunk or relapsed, Hadley didn't see a failing project. He looked at that man and thought, I did exactly that. I was that exact person.
That shared trauma, that daily active memory of his own time in the gutter, was the regenerative wellspring that kept his compassion from running dry.
Exactly. It kept him going.
That distinction between sympathy and empathy completely reframes how we think about burnout, honestly.
It's a game changer.
To prove the effectiveness of this relentless, fire-tested empathy, the biography shifts from theory to raw data. The book presents these incredible, colorful case studies of the people who found redemption there.
And these testimonies are the architectural load-bearing walls of the book.
They really hold the whole thing up.
For Chapman and Hadley, these aren't just heartwarming anecdotes. In an era where sociology and psychology were just beginning to be formalized as sciences, these testimonies serve as empirical evidence.
Right, they're data points proving that their radical methodology works.
Exactly.
I was reading through these names and stories, and I was struck by how much it reads like a 19th century cinematic universe of anti-heroes.
They're such distinct characters.
Every single one of them has this complex, deeply tragic origin story, and they all inexplicably orbit toward this one specific, tiny, sweaty room under the Brooklyn Bridge.
Let's really dive into a few of them.
Yeah, let's start with the man known as the Ohio lawyer.
His trajectory is a perfect illustration of addiction as the great equalizer. This was a man from a wealthy, prosperous, and deeply Christian home. He was highly educated. In fact, he studied law in the office of Edwin M. Stanton.
And we have to emphasize who that is. Edwin Stanton was Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of War.
A very big deal.
He essentially ran the Union war effort. So this Ohio lawyer wasn't just a small-town attorney. He was moving in the absolute highest, most powerful political circles in American history.
Precisely. But he learned to drink while he was away at college. He went to serve in the war. The drinking escalated. And slowly, year by year, he lost his practice, his wealth, and his reputation to whiskey.
Until he was nothing but a broken bum on the streets of New York.
The biography details a story he told about going back to the exact same police cell 22 times.
22 times to the same cell.
And he didn't go there just to sleep off a bender. He said he went to that cell to pray and to violently tell the Lord exactly what he thought of him.
That detail is so raw. The sheer anger. The theological wrestling match happening inside a filthy jail cell. He's an apathetic. He is furious at his own existence.
It's a very active despair.
And then you have a completely different kind of dissent with a man named Phil McGuire. Phil's story highlights the absolute grinding destitution of the neighborhood.
It's a heartbreaking story.
Before he finally stumbled into the Water Street mission, Phil was so consumed by physical withdrawal that he pawned his own shirt for 10 cents.
He gave up the very shirt off his back, likely in the freezing cold, for a dime.
Yes, just to buy 2 drinks of cheap, toxic Fourth Ward whiskey. He was that chemically consumed. But the mechanics of his transformation are what fascinated me.
What stood out to you?
Well, this man, who would trade his clothes for liquor, experiences this radical acceptance at Water Street, and he's transformed into an incredibly careful, just, and upright man.
He completely turned it around.
But the mission didn't just give him a Bible and send him away. They integrated him. He ended up managing the finances for the mission flawlessly until his death. He even lived right in Hadley's personal family home.
Think about the psychological impact of that trust. You took a man whose entire identity is thief and drunk, a man who cannot trust himself with a dime.
Right.
And instead of treating him with suspicion, you hand him the ledger and the treasury of the mission. You tell him, we trust you to manage our survival.
That level of profound trust forces a new identity onto the individual.
He rose to the occasion because someone finally expected him to be trustworthy.
And then there's Pop Lloyd. This story honestly brought tears to my eyes. Pop Lloyd was 72 years old.
Which was very old for the slums.
When we talk about 19th century homelessness, the physical toll on a 72-year-old body is unimaginable. He came into the mission bent nearly double. He was covered in rags, caked in dirt, and infested with vermin.
Just in terrible shape.
He told the workers he hadn't slept in an actual bed for weeks. And when the invitation to come forward was given, he was so broken that he timidly asked one of the women workers, "Do you think there is any hope for the worst man in New York?"
The psychology of age and hopelessness is so heavy there. He felt he had simply run out of time to be saved.
But of course, the answer he received was an unconditional yes.
Always.
And the mission also dealt with severe generational trauma, which we see in the story of Tom Farmer.
Right, Tom's story is different.
Tom was the son of a saloon owner. He didn't fall from grace. He was born in the gutter. He started stealing when he was 10 years old.
That's all he knew.
He had known absolutely nothing but the criminal underbelly his entire life. Yet he completely rewired his life at Water Street, breaking a generational curse.
And we absolutely cannot skip Henry Miller, whose street name was Slippery Dick.
An incredible historical nickname, Slippery Dick.
Right. Slippery Dick was a German-born thief. But what makes his case study so unique in this book is that Chapman notes he actually didn't drink much.
He wasn't a severe alcoholic like the rest of the crowd.
Exactly. But he was a compulsive thief. He had a dopamine loop tied entirely to stealing. He simply couldn't stop.
Yet he too found redemption there. It proves that the Water Street method of radical empathy and zero shame didn't just work for chemical dependency.
Yeah, it worked for deep behavioral compulsions as well.
Exactly. Hadley and Chapman are presenting a diverse portfolio of human brokenness. The fallen aristocrat, the generational criminal, the elderly destitute, the compulsive thief.
And showing that the exact same mechanism of unconditional love cured all of them.
But, as I was reading through these incredible case studies, a major frustration started building up in me.
Oh, what was that?
It's a recurring issue with historical texts.
Yeah.
We always hear about the great charismatic male leaders. We have S.H. Hadley, Jerry McAuley, Brother Henry. They are the ones giving the fiery speeches, writing the journals, and getting the headlines in the religious papers.
True.
But if you read between the lines, you realize that none of this, literally 0% of this entire operation exists without the unsung heroes. I am talking about the women and the family members working quietly behind the scenes.
You are absolutely right to pull that thread. While the book is nominally a biography focused on Hadley as the great frontman, it inadvertently documents a massive, deeply committed network of women.
They're holding everything together.
They absolutely provided the structural, logistical, and emotional foundation for everything that happened at 316 Water Street.
Let's start with Mrs. Sarah Hulse Hadley. I cannot overstate her sacrifice. She got engaged to Samuel when she was just 16 years old.
Just a teenager.
And the biography explicitly states she never deserted him through his years of dissipation. Think about what that actually means.
It's a lot to endure.
She stayed through the gambling debts, the thievery, the 52-drink binges of his brother living with them. She weathered a terrifying storm of instability.
Her resilience is the silent bedrock of his life. And her spiritual partnership with Samuel is highlighted in a very pivotal moment before they officially took over the Water Street mission.
Oh, the Bible verse moment.
Yes, they were deeply hesitant. Samuel felt the call, but it was a terrifying prospect to move into the slums. Sarah had her Bible open, and they decided to look to the text for guidance. Her eyes fell on the book of Isaiah, specifically chapter 58, verse 7.
I have the exact quote right here. She read, "Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thy own flesh."
Such a powerful directive.
And after reading that, she looked at her husband and said, "Dear, there is thy commission."
And they didn't treat that verse as a metaphor. They took it absolutely literally.
They really did.
The text mentions that when they first started their work, keeping house in 3 tiny rooms, Samuel would bring poor, destitute, filthy fellows right off the street to their humble home.
And Sarah would take out their very last dollar to buy food and care for them. She was the one physically managing the fallout of his radical empathy.
And speaking of their living situation, their housing choices were incredibly deliberate. They chose to live in rooms directly over the old mission at 316 Water Street.
Though they did try to leave once.
Right, they did. The book mentions that because Samuel had this prestigious ancestry and a natural appreciation for beautiful things, he briefly tried moving his family to a nicer, quieter part of the city.
He tried commuting to his charity work.
Right. But the experiment failed miserably. He moved right back to the slums because, as he famously put it, he wanted to be where the bums could find him in his slippers.
That image of the slippers is profoundly symbolic to me.
How so?
It speaks to absolute, unfettered accessibility. He realized that a crisis of addiction doesn't happen during convenient office hours.
It rarely does.
If a man was hallucinating or suicidal at 2 a.m., he couldn't wait until Sunday morning to talk to a pastor in a suit. He needed to be able to bang on a door and find Hadley in his slippers, ready to sit with him in the dark.
That's a great point. And Sarah Hadley wasn't the only woman holding up the sky in that neighborhood. The biography spends time highlighting Mother Sarah Sherwood.
Oh, she is fascinating.
It notes she was from a highly distinguished Connecticut family. 2 of her brothers were actually serving governors of the state.
She could have lived a life of absolute luxury and insulated comfort.
Completely.
Yet here she is, spending her days in the Water Street mission.
Yeah.
The author claims she probably physically shook hands with more drunkards than anyone else in the history of the city.
She was known specifically as the pillar for the backsliders. Think about the emotional labor that required.
It must have been immense.
When men relapsed and failed, they were too ashamed to face Hadley. But the text notes, they leaned heavily on Mother Sherwood.
Wow.
When Pop Lloyd, the 72-year-old man covered in vermin, asked if there was hope, it wasn't a famous preacher who answered him. It was Mother Sherwood who looked him in the eye, touched his filthy hand, and said, yes.
And then there's the fascinating sociological phenomena of Mrs. E.M. Whitmore.
Yes, her story is quite different.
She was a wealthy, high society New Yorker. The book notes that she and her husband originally came down to the slums just to see what was going on. It was basically Victorian poverty tourism.
Slumming, as it was called. Wealthy people would go look at the poor for a new sensation.
Exactly. But instead of just gawking and leaving, she was deeply personally converted by what she witnessed at Water Street.
It changed her completely.
She abandoned her high society superficiality and went on to found the Door of Hope missions, which became a massive network focused specifically on rescuing destitute girls, spreading all over the country.
What's fascinating about analyzing this network is seeing the division of labor.
Yeah, how did that work?
Well, you have the charismatic frontman in Hadley drawing the massive crowds, writing the articles, and preaching the sermons.
The public face of the operation.
Right. But the actual grueling day-to-day carrying of the emotional load, the physical hand-holding, the feeding, the late-night counseling of the relapsed addicts was largely borne by women like Sarah Hadley, Mother Sherwood, and Mrs. Whitmore.
Without their constant grounding presence, the mission would have been nothing but a loud room with good intentions. They were the actual architects of the safety net.
It's an incredible localized foundation. And it is staggering to think that a few small rooms in a dangerous, rat-infested slum run by a former drunk, his devoted wife, and a few dedicated friends created a ripple effect that quite literally went global.
The scale of the impact is truly remarkable. By the time the biography was written, the text refers to the Water Street mission as the undeniable mother church for rescue missions around the entire world.
It really was the blueprint.
It's almost like they created an open source software for human salvation. They wrote the code, radical empathy, zero shame, physical needs first, and then people came, copied the code, and installed it in different operating systems around the world.
That's a really modern way to look at it.
The book mentions a wealthy Australian citizen who visited New York, saw the absolute miracles happening at Water Street, and went back across the globe to build an entire rescue system in Australia and New Zealand based completely on the Water Street model.
And domestically, Dr. John H. Kellogg, who was the influential head of the massive Chicago lifeboat mission, explicitly called the Water Street mission his direct inspiration.
And we absolutely cannot forget the exponential legacy of Samuel's brother, Henry.
Right. The man who drank 52 drinks in a day.
Yes. Henry was ultimately converted at the exact same mission.
And he took his immense natural leadership abilities, the same skills that made him a Civil War commander, and organized the church army in America.
Chapman actually credits Henry Hadley with personally founding more rescue missions than any other single man in the world.
The legacy of that one family is just incalculable.
But with all of this massive global impact, the part of the biography that really gave me chills, the scene that perfectly encapsulates exactly who S.H. Hadley was at his core, is the description of his funeral.
Oh, that scene is unforgettable.
I want you to picture this profound split screen happening simultaneously in New York City. On one hand, down in the slums, you have a silent, weeping stream of 400 men and women.
The outcasts.
The bums, the thieves, the people that polite society literally threw away like garbage. They're walking rapidly down under the shadows of the Brooklyn Bridge, crowding into that tiny, hot little mission room to pay their respects because they loved him with everything they had.
And at the exact same time.
Yes, miles uptown, in massive, beautiful, vaulted churches, high-profile figures, the intellectual and religious elite of the era, men like Dr. Pearson and Reverend Chapman himself, are standing behind polished pulpits, delivering grand, eloquent eulogies for him.
It is the ultimate historical juxtaposition. A man equally, genuinely mourned by the absolute elite of society and the most forgotten, dirt-covered denizens of the slums.
I just marvel at that. How many people in all of human history have authentically occupied both of those extremes at the exact same time?
Very, very few.
It's impossible to fake that kind of universal cross-class respect. If you are a fraud, one side or the other is going to smell it on you.
And that is the key. He didn't fake a single thing. Chapman explicitly connects this universal mourning back to Hadley's core, defining trait his absolute unwavering genuineness.
He never code switched.
Never. He never changed his personality based on his audience. Whether he was sitting in a parlor talking to a millionaire banker who was funding the mission, or sitting in an alley talking to a penniless thief who had just stolen his overcoat, he was the exact same humble, unassuming man.
He treated the millionaire with the same respect as the thief.
And more importantly, he treated the thief with the exact same dignity as the millionaire.
Because he never, ever forgot the smell of fire on his own garments.
Precisely. The gutter was always right there in his mind, keeping him grounded.
So as we pull all of this incredible history together, what does this actually mean for us today?
What's the takeaway?
Yeah, as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of S.H. Hadley and the Water Street mission, what is the core lesson for you, the listener, navigating the modern world?
I think the overarching lesson here is a radical redefinition of influence.
I agree completely.
True influence, the kind of influence that actually reaches into the darkest part of a person's soul and permanently changes their trajectory, does not come from judgment.
It doesn't come from moralizing from afar or standing on a polished pedestal telling broken people how to fix themselves.
No, it comes strictly from proximity. It comes from extreme, fire-tested empathy. It comes from a willingness to sit in the literal and metaphorical dirt with those who are hurting.
And requires you to actively remove the barrier of shame, to look at the absolute worst aspects of human behavior and say, I see exactly what you are doing, I am not going to denounce you, and I am absolutely never going to give up on you. Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Leave them with something to think about.
We live in an era that is absolutely obsessed with scalable, tech-driven, frictionless solutions to deeply human societal problems.
We want an app for everything.
We want apps. We want sweeping policies. We want broad automated programs that can efficiently fix thousands of people at once from a safe, sanitized distance.
But S.H. Hadley's messy, localized, deeply analog story forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question.
Exactly. What if the most effective way to change the world isn't a scalable program or a grand policy at all? What if the only thing that actually works is an unwavering individual commitment to radically loving the broken person standing right in front of you, no matter how many times they fail, no matter how many times they steal your overcoat?
It is a profoundly challenging thought, but looking at the legacy of Water Street, it might be the only path that truly leads to a miracle of grace.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.